All right, all. Today is November 2nd. This week is really just going to be lab time to work on finishing up the labs and working on assignment two, which is due next week. Okay. So if you haven't already, you should be finishing up your sophisticated web page. This is a lab that's basically kind of like a template or practice for how to do the assignment. You basically use HTML and CSS and use kind of some of the advanced techniques we did, like CSS grids and CSS Flexbox, and there's a little bit of icon font in there and stuff like that. And you're going to build a sophisticated web page, something that looks very modern, kind of like what you would run across in modern web browsing. So this is due by tonight, by midnight. So, work on this if you've not already finished that. Reminder that your style tile and mockup are due this Friday. Okay. So remember, a style tile is a visual kind of guidebook. Okay. So we live in a world where websites can be different sizes. They can be thin or wider. Sometimes they're interactive and sometimes like meaning like their touch interface, like on your phone or a tablet. And sometimes you use like a mouse, like I'm doing right now. So we don't live in a world where websites look one way. We used to live that way, but not in pretty much ever since like, I don't know, 2009, we don't really live in that kind of world. So what I would suggest, so what we do design wise is we create kind of like a style tile. And a style tile basically kind of lays out the visual aesthetics of what the website or the project will have. So what I mean by that is it's like your style tile should lay out like generic kind of like these are what the typefaces would look like. These are what the colors would look like in the project. These are what textures might look like, or these are what interactive buttons might look like. If you're in, I don't know, Wikipedia, what does an average hyperlink look like? If you're on Nike, what does an average hyperlink look like, right? That kind of stuff. And that's kind of the point here. There's no like one way to build a style tile, but usually you define the visual characteristics. Like here's what a header would look like. Here's what a subhead would look like. Notice how they list the font and the size. If it's a color, you might want to give the hexadecimal value or the RGB value. The reason for that is like you may be working with other people who are not designers, and so having quick knowledge of like the fonts you're using and what size they are, or if they need to match the color really quickly, a hexadecimal or an RGB value is a quick, easy way to do that. You know what I mean? Um, that's a good way to do it. A lot of times it's good to sort of list out objective or that's objectives. Yeah, sure. Adjectives, that's a word too, right? And the idea of the listing out the adjectives is it's like, okay, well, when I talk with clients, a lot of times I don't get too specific about, at least not in the initial meeting. I don't like get into be like, okay, we're going to use blues and we're going to use Times New Roman. And because a lot of times they're not visual people, they're usually like business people or HR people or whatever. But what they can understand is like, what's the vibe of the website? Should the website feel very like sophisticated or should it feel very, I don't know, fun? You know what I mean? And different websites should feel different ways. A government website for like, I don't know, DMV should feel different than like a party store or I don't know, like a clothing store. Because those are two different types of vibes, right? Usually clothing is like very like fun or sophisticated if it's like, business clothes, like suits and ties and fancy dresses or whatever. So it's like, what's the vibe we're going for? You know what I mean? And a lot of times the vibe is going to dictate these other elements like the colors and the fonts and the textures and, the kind of imagery we might use. We want imagery that matches the vibe, right? Because we don't want to break the vibe. The whole point is to have a vibe, right? So these are just some examples where it's like, you're kind of listing out how the fonts look, how the colors might look. There's no set way to do this. But I'd, use your design skills, hopefully, or if you're new to design, think about these kind of elements, because you're going to use them in your project. It's like, okay, how would the colors apply to my layout that I got going on? Okay. So you can build this in Figma or Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever program you want to use. It's kind of up to you. So that's the style tile. I also want you to work on a mock-up. And a mock-up is essentially the layout that you've planned out with your wireframes plus your style tile. As I always kind of joke, not that it's a funny joke, wireframes plus style tile equals mock-up. Okay. What I mean by that is like the point of wireframes is to kind of lay out the structure without worrying about visuals. The point of a style tile is to set the visuals without worrying about structure. And so when you combine them together, that's what a mock-up is. The mock-up is, okay, this is what our project should look like when it's done. Okay. What's nice about this is you don't actually have to code anything. Like there's no HTML and CSS. You just use a program like Photoshop or Figma or whatever program you want to use, and you're kind of like laying this out, right? So mockups are really important, especially when you're dealing with like stakeholders or clients, and it's like this is probably what you're going to use the most during a meeting where you're like going to present it and be like, here's your website. And they're going to be like, okay, Oh, we like this, but I don't know. We don't like this photo. Can you change the photo to blah 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 blah? Or I don't know if we like this blue. Can that blue be purple? Whatever. And so this is kind of where you kind of, with the stakeholder a lot of times, hold on while I sneeze. Excuse me. This is where you're gonna like, figure out the layout and and kind of this is what it should look like. So you're taking your layout and your style tile, visual elements, the fonts and the colors and the textures, and you're applying them. And then once you sort of set this, it's like, okay, this is what our project is going to look like. Then the next step obviously is to take that and go like, how do I code this? You know what I mean? So these are both due by Friday. Both should be just, you can build them in any program you want. I don't care. You can use Photoshop, Illustrator, Figma, Photopea, insert name of graphic design program here. I don't care. I don't get paid by any of these companies, so I don't care which program you use. Um, and just make sure you export them as like a PDF or an image, standard image format like a JPEG or PNG or something like that. Okay. And then if you've finished with this and you finished with this, then you should be working on the actual assignment, the small business, which is due this upcoming Monday. Okay. Keep in mind, Monday I'm assigning new material, so you should assume that it should be done by Monday as opposed to having Monday to work on it. And we've talked about this, but essentially you guys are creating a two-page website, sophisticated website. Um, So at this point, it's like, you should understand how to use. It's like, okay, here's a two-column layout. And then like here's a multi-column layout. One, two, three, four, five. You can use Flexbox, you can use grids, however you want to do it. This particular student's using Font Awesome to bring in like icons that you can stylize quick and easily. Same person's doing that here. Oops. Don't know what they have a weird form. Somehow they wrote a GFF, but anyway. Yeah, anyway, probably misspelled it. Probably meant to write JPEG and wrote JFF, but I bet if I came in here and I changed that. Sorry, I got sidetracked. This means nothing to you guys. You don't get it, but it's, part of me just got a little inattentive there. But anyway, we'll fix that. Um, but you guys should be, using the, you know, wire the mile, using your pre-production material, your wireframe and your mock-up and your style to help you with this, right? So it's like, okay, I need to have two columns. How am I going to do that? Well, you probably might want to use CSS grids and, set up each grid to be 50-50 or 75-25 or whatever it is that you want to do. One FR, three FR, one FR, or however you want to do it. You know what I mean? When you're done, so you have to do 2 pages. You don't have to do more. You can do more if you want, but I'm not requiring it. You can always, you guys are going to submit me a root folder, meaning a folder that has all of the necessary files in it. That would include the HTML, CSS, images, audio, video, if there is any. And then I also want you to upload it to your server. You can either use your Infinity Free or GitHub or whatever server system you want to do. Get the URL and then put that into a document. So like if this was your URL, you would, make a new text document, save it, and then, put that into a root folder that I can then access. You know what I mean? And that is how you're going to submit that to me, which will be due on Monday. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. All right. Wednesday's class is also going to be lab time. I'm not teaching any new material. This is time for you to finish up labs, or finish up the style tile and then work on the project. Okay.